Now, this is a Suzuki GS500, and this is a Kawasaki Ninja. Or what's left of it, that is. So you're probably wondering at this point how I managed to acquire these two bikes. Well, let me tell you that. Now, I managed to acquire both of these bikes from an auction house, hence why I was able to get them for relatively cheap. Let me explain what happened. So I hopped onto Manheim and scrolled through that week's selection. There I saw the GS500, completely ignoring the bent forks, but at least noticed the hole in the clutch cover. Whereas the Kawasaki overall looked in pretty good nick minus some scratches, it wasn't until I saw the bike in person, which is when the wirings were completely, utterly fucked. So there I submitted a bid for other respective bikes. Now, I paid about $240 for the Suzuki, while $350 for the Kawasaki, not including the buyer's premium. Tallying that up in total, it cost me about $886. Which is actually not too bad. So, after selling the invoices, I made my way to Manheim Auction House in Altona, which I then immediately went through the wrong gate and was told to go to gate 4. Now, the staff were pretty friendly. They just told me to go wait in one of the bays and some guy will come and collect me. Now, after the guy eventually came and collected me, he just told me to go wait in the bay closer to the warehouse so he can dump the bikes behind my trailer. And it was at this point I realized I had a lapse in judgment because I was the one having to put the bikes onto the trailer. Accompanied with bent forks made handling this bike non-existent. This was obviously a learning experience that I would probably take on board for the rest of my life, having dealt with this now firsthand. Shit. So after I managed to brute force those bikes onto the trailer, I then proceeded to ratchet strap the back of the bikes with my patent technique before making my way home. Now, there is a sane reason for why I decided to go get two damaged bikes. The aim of this project is to get better at motorcycle maintenance. By doing so, I feel like I can then tackle more adept jobs and be able to do a lot of the work that a mechanic does by myself. Though I'm starting to think I'm a little bit over my head here. Now, I've already pointed out the bent forks here, though I may have missed a couple of other things. Now, as you can probably imagine, the Suzuki isn't in great condition, starting off with the aforementioned bent forks, a missing crank position center, a dent in the headers, a crooked kickstand, curb rash on the front rim, sheared fork bolt, a lost cause for a mirror, scratches to the master cylinder, the front brake lever, the headlight, the tachometer, and the muffler. An indicator that refuses to play ball and sit upright. Scratches and general grime throughout the bike, not including the ones mentioned before. Scratches to the fender, which is likely what caused the dent in the header to begin with. And a non-functional rear set just to add to that list. Adding all that up, that's about 16 problems.
A lot of damage.
Whereas the Kawasaki so far seems to be all electrical issues. I mean, considering that the battery is not even connected up and there's random mishmash of wires everywhere, I'm not able to really troubleshoot or provide a prognosis of what actually is the problem here. And the fact that I don't have a key as well doesn't really help. Now, the Kawasaki isn't exactly in prime condition. I mean, we also do have some cut wires at the front, which I have no idea what the hell they do. We have some scratches on the muffler, even more worse than the Suzuki. Another floppy indicator to piss me off. We also have a wibbly-wobbly kickstand that's not going to be holding anything up. The rear seat key barrel. Well, I mean, just look at it. And we got some general scratches as well everywhere here. Now, with both of these bikes being in warehouses for a considerable amount of time, it was natural for them to be covered in dust, grime, and other assortments of shit. So I gave them a clean for hygiene and practical reasons being that I might have missed something on initial first glance. The Suzuki had some adhesive on the front of the tank which I was struggling to get off no matter how much I bloody scrubbed the goddamn thing. So I made a local trip to Bunnings and acquired some stuff. From there I just divvied up the tubs for other bikes as well as some tubs so I can put bolts, nuts and anything else in there. I decided to label the tubs to make my life easier as well as please my OCD. So I started with the rear fender, noticing it had the most amount of damage compared to any other section of the fairing, which was not hard to believe considering some arsehole tried to jimmy the lock before I owned the bike. This was annoying because the quotes I found online were going to cost me about $200 just to replace the rear fender alone. So I continued to just remove the rest of the panels on the bike, noticing some mismatched bolts and just random assortment everywhere. And this was the point where I started realizing that having a sport bike is not all sunshine and rainbows, because the fairings will cock block you from accessing anything inside the bike to begin with. So I'm having a hard time with these little fuckers there. And honestly, given my track record of taking these rivet pins out, I'm not looking forward to it. My hesitation was warranted because at this point I then proceeded to break nearly every rivet pin that I came across here. I was starting to think Lady Luck was on my side here because I uncovered a random hex socket just on the bike, and I have no idea where it came from, but hey, free socket I guess. That luck, however, did not last, because I was then introduced to the trim piece underneath the headlights, which comprised entirely of rivet pins. So after only completing half of that trim piece, I then just went to the headlight assembly, just removing the bolts there, prolonging the inevitable. Now, this wasn't any easier because in the process of trying to take out some of those fairing pieces, I realized I missed some bolts, and then I was awkwardly holding it, hoping I didn't just break the entire thing in two. So far, I've only gotten half of the fairings off. Now I've got this half to complete. Now, as much as I wasn't looking forward to this side, it was actually surprisingly easier. I don't know if it's because I was more experienced at this point, having taken off the other half of the fairings, or if there was just less bolts around. But even this was sort of short-lived because I forgot that I had to do the other half of the trim piece that was underneath the headlight assembly. And I, as you can guess, broke off nearly every single rivet pin as usual. Now, currently the bike is mostly being stripped. I've obviously still got the front mudguard on because there's not really much point taking it off at present. I needed to most of those fairings off because I needed to get to the key ignition, as well as take apart the rear cylinder barrel. I don't really need to change that, but considering that the kit I bought is a 3-in-1 deal and the keys will only work on them, I'm kind of forced to change it anyway. Now, thankfully the wiring wasn't actually as bad as I made it out to be. You see, a lot of the componentry actually had its own designated spot. What I thought was just a random black box was actually the ECU, which is now tucked away nicely in here. And the wiring and all the other harnesses followed suit. The fuse box, on the other hand, someone decided with sticky fingers to pinch all my fuses. He's also probably the same person who decided to jimmy the lock here. So as it is, I'm just waiting for my order of fuses to come so I can slot them all in accordingly, as well as getting some bolts so I can get the battery connected. Hopefully then I can start to power the bike on. Now, I'm about to take off the rest of the assembly and the fairings and the speedometer and everything else here. So at this point, I'm just waiting to get that component in so I can connect everything up and then give this all nice clean and put it back together. Whereas the Suzuki, on the other hand, this, which I was initially led to believe was the stator, considering what the auction house said it was on the web page, it's actually the signal generator, which is responsible for timing this to ensure that it will spark when it's at the top dead center, as opposed to, sparking when either the valves are open or the thing is not in its appropriate state. Now, I have scoured online through eBay and a bunch of other sources and found parts for either respective section, though some range from cheap and really crap to expensive but basically factory new. I found a even signal rotor middle bracket pit here that was going to cost me about $100 for that tiny little part. However, I was very lucky and found a seller who had a wrecked Suzuki GS500, 2007 model. So I'm just inquiring with them about either respective parts that are broken here that I can replace and hopefully just swap them out relatively cheap. And that will mean that this project is on its way to revival. But first things first, I need to remove the fuel from both tanks. Both of these bikes have gas inside them. Questionable how old they are, so I'm going to remove them anyway and just use it as cleaning gas. So I bought some of this from Bunnings, and I just have to give these things a bit of a suck and go from there. Now at this point I was just getting set up, trying to get the cord out and cut to length, which was kind of a bit of a pain in the ass. I fed it through shortly after and made my first attempt. genuinely surprised how well this went first attempt. I was honestly thinking I'd get a mouthful of petrol and have to pump my stomach for this. Off to a good start at least. Yeah, that did not last long. You see, the hose wasn't getting constant access to the petrol, it was moving around a bit, so as a result, I was losing suction, and since I didn't want to wrap my mouth around that disgusting plastic that now had more petrol around it, I had to go rinse it and wash it off. But this didn't make any of the next attempts any more successful. I didn't get any in my mouth, I just... So I thought perhaps I can tackle some other task and come back to this later. So I figured I might as well tackle the Suzuki's floppy indicator problem now. Now, while waiting for the parts for the Kawasaki to come in, I figured I'd tackle some of the little problems here that's facing the Suzuki, which is of course the wibbly-wobbly headlight that's not getting back in. So I figured I would take apart the globe and get to all the wiring and disconnect it. Though I realize I don't have a spanner to then take this nut off. So I'm kind of at a roadblock here. At this point, I just went back to the Suzuki, making my next attempt to siphon gas from it. However, rather than just give it another try, I did some research and found two methods that could perhaps work. One where you just apparently blow to the side of the hose and, miraculously enough, it should just flow through. This didn't really work well. I'm not too sure why, but I either might be doing something wrong or the advice that I got from this was absolute bullshit. And after having no luck, I just gave up and decided to go with option 2. So I came back with an empty bottle of Simple Green and just used it to squeeze. And surprisingly, that was actually working. Fuck. Well, at least it worked though. I'm gonna remember that for next time. Good protection, kids. At this point, this was just a back and forth process of just moving the hose here and there, giving the bottle a squeeze, checking to see if there's any gas left, and pretty much going from there. I decided to tape a canister and pretty much just label it my cleaning gasoline, which I perhaps could use in the future. Keep out of the reach of children. Probably should have read this before I did any of this work to begin with. I was still struggling to get the last remnants of the petrol out, so I took the bike off its center stand and onto its kickstand. That kickstand that's bent as all hell. Which actually worked in favor this time because it put the bike on a more of a lean angle, so I was able to hopefully pull the petrol all to one side and push it all out, using my legs to squeeze the petrol tank instead of using the spare Simple Green bottle that I conjured up. Afterwards, I made my way over to the Kawasaki and figured I might as well get this over with, and since I didn't have a key, I had to sort of do things a bit more unorthodox. Now, I currently don't have a key for this, so I'm doing it the old-fashioned way, which is to, well, it's really self-explanatory now, ain't it? Come on, you son of a bitch, just get the fuck. Yeah, I wasn't really having much luck with that, so I just got the pry tool and said, fuck it, I'm just gonna open this and hopefully it all works for the best. That's probably alright. Yeah, I don't sound confident there, do I? So you should be able to see inside there. I can see the surface over here does not have gasoline. I'm gonna perhaps suggest there's actually not that much here, which is, well, it's good for me anyway. Gasoline does look disgusting, so let's get that handled. Now, there's nothing really much to add here, except I just did what I did for the Suzuki to the Kawasaki, except this time it was quicker because there was less petrol. Got most of it out, and we'll call that success. Now, at this point in time, there's really nothing else I can do. You see, the Kawasaki, I'm still waiting for the ignition barrel, the bolts for the battery, which I just have to make a trip to the local Bunnings, and still install the fuses in the fuse box. I did manage to acquire aforementioned fuses, but without a battery, it's kind of pointless, you see. Whereas the Suzuki, on the other hand, I am meeting with the owner tomorrow, who will then have the associated parts with his wrecked project. So hopefully I'm able to relinquish some of those parts and fit them to this bike. Thank you for watching to the end of this video, and if you do have a question about this project, do leave it down below, and I'll try to get to it as best as I can. And until next time, catch you around.